Welcome everyone to today's session, Why Invest in Partnerships at this year's APMA 2020 conference. It's great to connect with you all virtually, and we're looking forward to connecting with everyone again, hopefully in person next year. Before we begin, we'd like to give a special thank you to APMA and our sponsors at WEtech Alliance in WindsorEssex and with the Women in Mobility Group through the U.S. Consulate. I'd also like to thank our speakers for today for taking the time to join. As you will hear, each one of them brings a different perspective to why partnerships matter. So I'm really looking forward to today's dialogue. Today's session will focus on partnerships and why we need to invest in building stronger partnerships, both regionally and binationally. Especially now through COVID and in this new political environment, we need to invest in partnerships because the future economy needs a more connected approach. Specifically, partnerships help us to build and grow our research and talent. They strengthen our trade and global competitiveness, and they connect and grow our innovation assets. Also, partnerships really help us build a more inclusive and diverse ecosystem. So we'll be exploring these four themes further, but right now let's start with some introductions. We'll start, and can each one of you please provide your names and a little bit about your organizations. So let's start with Shelley.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for inviting us this morning and organizing this panel. I'm looking forward to speaking with everyone. My name is Shelley Fellows. I'm the chair of Automate Canada. I am an entrepreneur and founded a company about 26 years ago with a couple of partners that specializes in advanced technologies for manufacturing. The Industry Association Automate Canada serves the industrial automation sector in Canada.
Great, thanks, Shelley. Peter?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. I'm Peter Worrell. I'm the Director of Applied Research and Development at Sinclair College in Windsor. And with respect to research at the college, we're very much focused on three things. One is to work with industry and help them solve their challenges. Another is to work with students and give them that experiential learning that is so valuable in today's age. And the third is working with our faculty members to make sure that they remain current and up to date with all the current technologies and even lead in some of these technologies. So by working with the industry partners, we're able to work on leading edge technologies, leading edge projects, where we're really staying up to date, and we're making sure that we have that talent development pipeline that is so valuable in today's day and age.
Great, thanks, Peter. Hind.
Hey everyone, my name is Hind Uraho, and I am currently a senior mobility strategist at the Office of Mobility Innovation. So it's an office within the mayor's office here in Detroit. I am originally from Morocco, so I am neither American nor Canadian, but I've lived in the US for 7 years and in Detroit specifically for 3, and absolutely loving the proximity to Canada and the ability to just drive through the bridge or the tunnel across borders. I also co-founded the Women in Mobility Network, which has women in the mobility industry in both Michigan and WindsorEssex and Canada in general.
Great, thank you for joining, Hind. Carolyn.
Hi everyone, thanks Matt. I'm Carolyn Sauer. I am the Senior Director for Mish Auto. Mish Auto is known for promoting, retaining, and growing the automotive and mobility industry across our state's signature industry of all of the corners of Michigan. So we accomplish that through a couple of different areas. We do a lot of CEO convening and connecting with our legislators, both state and federal. We have an advocacy group that really is, speaking as the voice overall for Michigan and the needs that we have. We focus a lot on talent, recruitment and retention, how to brand our industry so that people realize it's high tech, and also we focus a lot on mobility and new mobility with partnerships with like Planet M and our landing zone, and making sure that we can connect startups with OEMs, tier suppliers to promote innovation across the industry as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Carolyn. And last but not least, Diane.
Thanks, Matt, and thanks APMA for having me as a panelist today. RICO International Group is the company I'm with. I'm the president and CEO. We're proud to be one of the part of the manufacturing technology ecosystem here in Ontario, and specifically in WindsorEssex. We have our origins as a mold shop, so have served the parts industry, particularly the automotive space, for many, many years, but also have a very strong automation division, which produces some amazing equipment and helps. We feel our mission is to help other manufacturers stay globally competitive. So that's what we've been doing.
That's great. So as you can see, we have a great panel here today, all from very diverse perspectives in terms of partnerships, both locally, regionally, and binationally. So I mentioned earlier before we began that we were really going to be exploring 4 major themes. So the themes around research and talent, trade and global competitiveness, entrepreneurship and innovation, and diversity and inclusion. So let's start with that first theme, research and talent. And this I'll pose to the group. When you're looking at talent, are you looking for individuals with that binational experience, or how important is a binational experience for your organizations? Maybe I'll turn it to Diane first.
Yeah. I mean, our origins of our company have always been as exporters. So definitely when you're looking at someone in, say, a sales role, having that experience in working across the border is definitely very important. I think, as a region, our talent pool is pretty exposed to the US, us being so close to them. They're kind of a part of us, it feels like some days. And so I think it's sort of naturally here in the people who are originally from this area. I even have an example of the head of our HR in our organizations who came from another organization where she had some exposure to some of the HR differences across the border because of divisions of that entity. And those were very helpful things, and they're great when you're looking forward and you're looking at new things and developing different partnerships. So.
Excellent. Yes. Carolyn, you mentioned a little bit of the work that you do in creating kind of this talent pipeline or fostering it. Wondering if you can touch on that a little bit.
Sure. So our investors are made up of several different types of organizations and companies. We work with OEMs, suppliers, startups, educators, several universities. And so one of our main focus areas, as I mentioned, is to really brand the automotive industry as something that's high tech, that's global, or in this case, binational, and is growing, and how we can, deliver that message to students and to young professionals, across the board and the border. So, we work on that by bringing different groups of people together, looking at what types of curriculums are offered and how we can further advance those to meet the specific needs of, a skilled workforce and a high-tech talent workforce.
Awesome. I'll open this up. I mean, how do you engage partners from across the border, both from a Canadian perspective and also U.S. partner perspective? Hind, do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, I frankly, quite organically, especially with the Women in Mobility Network, women in our network just reach out to their friends, colleagues, LinkedIn connections, etc., and promote our events. And so just organically, we have grown this international cross-border relationship with folks from different partners in WindsorEssex that I don't think I would have foreseen before. I just wouldn't have I didn't go into building this network with the idea that it was going to be international, but it ended up being that way. And so most recently, we had a kind of a handshake partnership with the WindsorEssex Economic Development Corporation on a grant for speaker series for women in industry, specifically automobility industry, as WindsorEssex likes to name it. And this was facilitated by both Yvonne Pilon and Nicole Anderson, and both of them came to our events, came to our happy hours. We met them in person, and then we were like, you know what, why not?
Yeah, I think that point too about kind of the uniqueness of the region, where a lot of this is being done organically just because of our geographical proximity to one another, right? Peter, I'm
But
wondering.
no, actually, Matt, if I could jump in, because I have the opposite opinion. Well, I think that, organic networks and the tools that we have available to us now are very important. I was always very deliberate about it. So when we as a company decided that we wanted to expand our business in the US, I reached out to people like trade commissioners. I reached out to the economic development teams in Detroit to say, hey, we need some help. We don't know much about your market. And we'd like to be informed, and can you help connect us? And so we always found those kinds of partners were really helpful in accelerating things for us.
That's interesting. You're kind of seeing it from both ends, one, that organic side, but then also, like you mentioned, the deliberate, right? So making that strategic decision, that investment in this kind of binational partnership is going to be an advantage. Yes. So kind of speaking to those advantages, from a binational perspective, Peter, I'm wondering if you can touch on how programming from a binational perspective and curriculum development is really playing into what the college is working on. I don't want to let the cat out of the bag, so to speak, in terms of some of the projects that you're working on, but if you can share some of the initiatives that you have on the go, that'd be great.
Sure. Actually, Sinclair College has been working on articulation agreements with many institutions, not only in Michigan, but across the world. So we have, if we look at Michigan itself, Wayne State University, we have a number of articulation agreements between our college and that school. We look at Lawrence Tech University, that's another institution where we have some articulation agreements. And I think the advantage of that is really to build that talent pipeline. So for example, if we have students that are graduating from our program here, they can then go on, take their diploma and take it to the US and add on to their knowledge and skill. So it just creates a much more stronger person, or a stronger graduate that can really impact the industry. We also have working relationships within Windsor. The college and the university work well together in terms of making that stronger relationship between those students. In the ideal world, we would have somebody with practical experience as well as theoretical knowledge and skill, and having those collaborations between the college and university and universities in particular in the US, as well as Windsor, is a great thing. Specifically talking about the mobility sector, that it's relatively new compared to all our other articulation agreements, and the college is starting to get on board with developing curriculum around the mobility sector. And we have started engaging with institutions such as Wayne State University. They have a Master's in Mobility program. And so some discussions have already been going forward with respect to how do we now work together so we have that pipeline that feeds students from the college into Wayne State, and maybe even vice versa, having some Wayne State students or even University of Windsor students come to the college and get that practical experience. And I think the biggest benefit of having those partnerships, and especially binational partnership, is that we treat, and you mentioned it, we treat this region as one region. So WindsorEssex and southeastern Detroit, or Michigan, including especially Detroit, as one region. And the more talent we can develop in this region, and then working with our industry partners and our economic development organizations, we can then retain that talent here as we build this industry.
Excellent. That's a great point, Peter. I think maybe if moving to kind of our second theme around trade and global competitiveness, I want to start first with a quote from Flavio Volpe from APMA. It was in an article I recently saw. So I'm going to read this. It's a brief quote. I'm going to read it quickly, and then maybe to our speakers, think of that quote in terms of your response back. But here's the quote. After a rough start in automotive talks, Team Canada negotiated a requirement to source more content locally for the first time in 25 years. That means more of the parts, systems like sensors and cameras and other advanced technologies that comprise the cars of tomorrow must be sourced here. For the first time ever, batteries, electric motors, and all the cool stuff that makes them work have to be sourced locally too. Those parts do not travel well, and as a result, local availability will drive many future investment decisions. So I guess the question to our panelists here, How has the trade negotiations really affected your binational partnerships? Would you say they're more positive now that ratification on the new NAFTA has been finalized? Let's start with Diane.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. It's that period of negotiation created a great deal of uncertainty. And as a result, there was a lot of nervousness, I'm going to suspect, on the part of our customers and our suppliers as well about investment and about proceeding with new programs. So the resolution of that agreement has been critical to bring some normalcy back to business, even given the COVID situation, which is kind of pulling in the other direction sometimes. But yeah, it's been very important that they were able to complete those negotiations.
Excellent.
I would agree with you, Diane. And I think what's really interesting about it, especially is when you focus on the localization part. I mean, the Great Lakes region has accounted for about 26% of vehicle production, and our partnerships and working, across borders has really allowed us to, combine resources in manufacturing and IT. But also, Canada has the natural resources that are needed for high-tech parts like the lithium batteries and things like that. And as we come out of this pandemic, I think a lot of us are focusing more on localization and not, globalization. So it'll be great that we can really work together to, build these components and the things that are needed to advance the industry, in our own backyards.
But looking at it, many of the participants in the industry are global companies. And I look to, as you mentioned, the uncertainty around NAFTA, which was driving me crazy and so many of our members crazy, was, not knowing the direction, one, for our decisions about our businesses, but also the decisions of our customers. And now I look at the announcements by Ford, FCA, and General Motors here in Ontario with respect to their major investment in production facilities. And that's all occurred after NAFTA was, settled and the terms of engagement were agreed to by all of the parties. So that uncertainty, I feel, like you said, Diane, holds back decision making. Once we kind of nail that down as businesses, we hate uncertainty, give us those rules and we will operate within them and do our best and inform ourselves and plan. So now we've got plans being put in place by major automakers, recently announced, and it's very exciting for Southwestern Ontario. But like you said, Peter, this region extends across that Canada-US border. It's all very positive for this part of North America.
And it affected educational institutions as well, in particular with respect to students getting jobs when they're done. So there was a bit of hesitation to grow companies, and which means that they're not hiring as many graduates as they would have. But now it seems that there's more of a big push, and especially, as you said, with the announcements by the major OEMs, going in, getting into electric vehicles, then that gives us an opportunity to start exploring those options and start developing curriculum and providing some talent in those areas as well.
Yeah. And I would even say, we saw on the US side as well. So Ontario for sure put a lot of investment into EV production and manufacturing. And even on the US side, so you have GM and Ford now also heavily investing in either ramping up factories again, or investing in new types of manufacturing like EVs. I think that it's absolutely clear that this is going to be that new wave coming out of this new NAFTA. Hind, I'm wondering from a local perspective, especially from the city of Detroit's perspective, how was the trade relationship affecting your work at the city of Detroit?
Well, so my focus is on providing mobility solutions for Detroit residents. And so what that means is making sure that they have options to get around, and specifically to have access to jobs, grocery stores, childcare, and all of these essential things that they need to function and lead a normal life. And so whatever means more jobs for Detroit residents means exciting work for our office, because then we need to be reaching out to these employers who are getting an influx of employees and understanding, like explaining these are the options that we have. How can we work with you to provide solutions? Maybe even doing surveys for the newly hired to understand, are they struggling with the same issues that we've known about before or not? How can we provide them with basically like an easier way to get to work? And so in other words, what I'm trying to say is that trade relations definitely affect my job directly, because then what that means is I need to continue building partnerships to continue providing solutions for Detroit residents who need to get to work.
Yeah. And we've touched on this a little bit already in terms of kind of the uniqueness of this region and the binational aspect of Windsor, Essex, Detroit. I'm wondering how this location's really allowed companies on both sides of the border to secure contracts with new partners. Diane, I'm wondering if you can kind of touch on that.
Yeah, I mean, we have such an incredible wealth of both talent and resources in this region. I mean, it's probably not rivaled anywhere in the world, I would argue. But that's a great place to start any kind of dominance, if you will, or strength in an area. Then when you add to that the innovation and the new ideas that are coming out of people and organizations here and working together, I think, the sky's the limit for us. I mean, we came up with knowing, and the other part is that sort of deep understanding of the automotive industry that we've had here for so long. We know what the needs are. We came up with a really innovative, flexible automation solution for some parts manufacturers that will allow them to reduce their CapEx and to reduce their labor investment and achieve more production on a variety of lower volume but higher mix of different parts. Those are the kinds of things that we're going to use automation and our innovation to do as a region, not just here at RICO. And I think we've got all the great building blocks to be able to do that.
That's great, yeah. And Shelley, from the business perspective as well, I'm wondering too if you'd like to comment on that.
Well, I've got a couple thoughts actually, because it's, when we made the decision in '94 to found a technology company focused on manufacturing, we at that time had the luxury of being able to choose anywhere in Canada to start to found the business, and we chose WindsorEssex. There were a few reasons why. Two of the big ones were proximity to that Canada-US border, and so proximity to the US market and on into Mexico. As well as the concentration of the automotive industry in this region. And the thing that's interesting, because that was our decision, right, when we put our plans together for the business, but when we looked at the country for Automate Canada, when we were looking at the concentration and the clusters of industrial automation and advanced manufacturing technology companies in Canada, first off, Ontario has about 50% of them. So big concentration in the province of Ontario. And depending on how you count them, there's approximately 600 of them in Ontario. Again, depending on how you count them, there's about 250 in WindsorEssex. So Ontario has about half of Canada's. WindsorEssex has about half of Ontario. So about a quarter of Canada's automation, industrial automation, technology companies are here. And like you said, Diane, it's that border, it's the business ecosystem that's down here, it's access to talent, and the students that are graduating from our local educational institutions. And I'm not, buttering you up, Peter, but like Sinclair College and the University of Windsor work really closely with industry to make sure that the students who are graduating have the right skills, knowledge in order to jump right into our workforces and be effective. So the numbers don't lie. Like, the numbers show us that we have a cluster. The companies are choosing this region, and we know that there are a lot of advantages. One big one, which is access to that Canada-US border.
That's excellent. Yeah, and I think that's a perfect segue into kind of entrepreneurship and innovation, that third theme we want to talk about. So, like when you're looking at an IT cluster in southwestern Ontario and Michigan, and you overlay that with the auto manufacturing clusters that we have here regionally, I think the only place in North America where those two kind of primary clusters converge is right here in this region, which is amazing. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering how maybe Detroit's leveraged these clusters both locally and in the region to really improve its ranking in comparison to Silicon Valley or even globally. Carolyn, I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, I'd love to take this one. So I think, Silicon Valley emerged as this IT software forward-thinking powerhouse that immediately attracted a lot of young professionals. But there's really one thing that Silicon Valley does not have, and I would say makes this region so much more competitive, is our longstanding history and capability of actually making things. Just like you mentioned, there's such a convergence here, and it is the only place in North America where you literally can overlay the circle and see we have IT and manufacturing all coming together. That's great that Silicon Valley has an IT cluster. There are several other manufacturing, clusters across, the rest of North America. But this is really, in this region, this is where it all comes together. And so when we think about it in terms of competing with Silicon Valley, I look at it more like we need to, again, it kind of ties in with what we're trying to do with promoting our brand as an industry. People need to understand that we're doing really cool things here in Michigan and in Canada, and it's high tech and it's real, and we need those types of software and programmers and people to make these things work. And that's what's really special, I think, about this partnership between, Canada and Michigan, is that we have the same interests. We have a lot of different resources that we can tap into, and we're the powerhouse that's going to keep moving this forward.
And if I can add, one of the things that, just to confirm what you were saying about, us marketing our region, one of the things that we see is our talent is going to Silicon Valley and not staying around here as much as we would like. And I think one of the problems is we don't promote that. We don't promote the fact that these are sexy jobs here in this region, that we right. And we actually can combine the software IT with the manufacturing parts of it and the automation and the making of things. And I think that's really, really cool that we just haven't told that story.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I also think that talent migrates elsewhere because of many reasons, not just whether they have access to industry or not. And so I feel like there might be, like, for example, I don't know, weather reasons for which people are going to California. But for those who are career oriented or want to build a career in this sector or in all the sectors that mobility and the automotive industry kind of touches on, this is a place where you really have close touch points with different nodes of the ecosystem. So this, I honestly just don't compare the two altogether, just because when I am talking to my counterparts in city government in, let's say, LA or San Jose or San Francisco, and I explain to them how, for example, during COVID-19, where we were trying to provide transportation solution to residents, because we know that 25% of Detroiters don't have access to cars, and we were offering a drive-through testing site, which means a quarter of our population was not going to be able to access testing. And almost immediately, Honda and Penske reached out to our then chief mobility officer, Mark DeLaverne, and was like, let's fix this together. And then really quickly afterwards, in record time, we were able to mount a pilot for transportation for testing, and have Honda Odysseys that were retrofitted with a different airflow and a plexiglass barrier that was built into the vehicles, and we just had that. And for me, when I talk about this at the beginning, it was kind of normal that of course it's going to happen, because we have various and multiple personal touch points through industry events, through meetings, etc. That we know these people by like face to face, and that makes a whole difference. And this is something that they just don't have. And so for someone who is a young professional who's looking to, advance my career, it is just amazing to have this opportunity and to be in such a cluster, I guess. And I guess I also think that there's a benefit in local partnerships. There's just something that I don't have to understand as part of the city of Detroit when I'm working with partners who are local, because they understand how Detroit works. They understand how we function, what are the conditions under which we function. And meanwhile, when I'm working with international or like even national partners who are not based in WindsorEssex or in Detroit, there's a lot of level setting that I need to do before I can get to the meat of the conversation. And so all of this really, really makes for great opportunities, and maybe it's just marketing, but for those who are career oriented and who are starting off their careers, I think this is an amazing place to start off in.
I think that's a great point, and I love the example that you shared about the Honda Pilot, because that's just such a strong example of how quickly our industry is able to pivot. And, there were a lot of things that were done in, both in Canada and in Michigan at the time that PPE equipment was needed. And the fact that so many of our manufacturing plants were able to quickly retool and reassess and immediately address a need that was important to our communities. That's the kind of exciting things that we're doing in this region. And that example just highlighted it perfectly, that we can actually make an impact, make the product, make the change.
That's a great point. And I mean, even locally here in WindsorEssex, we saw a number of manufacturers pivot some of their operations into PPE as well. Yeah, that's an excellent point. I'm wondering too, if we can kind of touch on a little bit around, what considerations should companies really be aware of as they're investing in either a new country or a new region, and what types of partnerships are really going to be key for those companies? Shelley, would you like to touch on that?
Yeah, well, I had mentioned earlier on in the session about the very deliberate decisions we would make when we were looking at entering a new market, and how we took advantage of resources that are available through the various levels of government. Economic development were always tremendous resources for us, as well as the trade commissioners. And what I found that they can do is they can really quickly provide the color behind the statistics, right? So, you do research when you're planning expansion or entering new markets, you do your research, but they're numbers. And so these types of people could provide the kind of color behind it so that we could understand it a little better. They would also help us with introductions, and in many cases served as, and I'm going to use the word translator, but I don't want to imply language barriers. It was more like culture and business processes and those nuances. They would translate that for us in a way that sometimes you don't realize. You're going into a market and the banking system just has this slight difference, and you're not sensitive to it, and suddenly payments get delayed and people start to panic, and we don't need to have those kinds of panics. We can avoid those if we do a little bit of work ahead of time, and then getting those introductions and starting to develop relationships. Sometimes you need someone to help translate some of the cultural signs in those relationships where something can be happening, and with our Canadian background, we would react in a certain manner to it that other cultures or people may not understand. Everything from our willingness to apologize for everything to to some of the language that we use and how we approach negotiations. So I've found the resources available through governments as well as trade and industry associations to be really valuable in that expansion as a business. person.
Excellent. Yeah. And Diane, could you touch on that?
Yeah, I would say in my case, it's been, they're kind of a blend. I don't want to call them informal networks because they're not quite as formal as people that Shelley referred to. But I was fortunate to be part of a women's presidents organization group in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where I was the only Canadian. And so you can only imagine some of the great conversations we had about, let's talk about rules for employment. They differ quite significantly across that Detroit River of ours. Things like how you should take action and different things. I've also been part of a private directors association, which has got chapter members from Windsor and Michigan and Ohio, actually. And again, just getting into conversations with people, you start to learn about who some of these potential partners are, people that you could bring value to and could bring some back to you. And you get to know each other too and understand each other's worlds a little better. So I think it gives us some great strengths. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent.
So
I think
actually, sorry, I just add a couple of points. Obviously, I'm coming from the educational side of things, but I think it's important for companies to understand, what educational institutions are around, the region and what they can offer. So I belong to an association, Automation Alley, which is a Michigan-based association, and I'm the only, Canadian representative from the educational institutions there. So it's really neat to learn what the other institutions have to offer. And one of the things that we've talked about is, each institution has certain strengths, and each institution can offer different companies, different expertise. And so one of the things that we're trying to do as Automation Alley is to identify what are the strengths of all the different institutions so that we can work with partners. And so if somebody comes to us, for example, and we say, that's not really our strength, we can recommend a different institution that's located. I mean, the great thing is, this border is very, very shallow, that we can say, hey, they're right across the board, there's somebody that can help you out, and vice versa. Somebody that needs some help from our side that we have expertise in, we could be the solution provider for them.
That's a really good point, Peter, and specifically around, growing kind of that support for startups and entrepreneurs in this region and using this binational advantage. Hind, I wonder if you can touch a little bit on the Women in Mobility initiative a bit more in terms of, how that's really played out from a binational standpoint.
Yeah, so so essentially this is a network that is trying to build a tribe of women who are in this industry, who already exist in the industry, but also encourage more women who don't necessarily know about the mobility industry or have an interest in automotive to join us. And so we really have like more than 500 women who are part of the network. Of course, like some of them are more active than others, but basically the way we started is that there was just women movers and shakers who were just making things happen, as Caroline said earlier, and we realized, wow, like this is a community that is really strong, and we just wanted to have ownership over the conversation about where is this going, where is this industry going, and how can we build connections that are professional, that can advance all of the industry together in a diverse and inclusive way. So we don't necessarily discuss the hardships of women in the workplace as much, but because we just have so many women who are just, making things happen. And so at this point, we discuss more of what does mobility mean in the future for you? Introducing different women to each other within the ecosystem. And Mish Auto has a really great map of the mobility ecosystem here. And I think that that was really eye-opening for me, for example, when I accidentally stumbled upon this industry, and now I'm so curious about it, I don't want to leave. And just being able to see all of the nodes in this ecosystem and how they are connected to each other, and the importance of knowing how, what are the gaps in my network, for example? Do I know enough people in legal and policy making around mobility? Do I know enough people in cybersecurity? Do I even know what does it mean to move data? altogether if I am on the city government side. And so being able to have access to this, and also it reminds me of this effect or paradox. There, it has a name, but I just can't remember it. But there's a reason why bakeries would cluster in one street, even though there's high competition. If you were to think about it logically, it makes more sense for bakeries to be spread out so that they share the market in a city. But then you will find all the jewelers in one place, all the bakeries in one place. And the reason why, and when you see Michigan and when you see Detroit and Windsor being on proximity, and as Shelley was mentioning earlier, just how huge the cluster is, just ask yourself, why? Why do they all cluster there? And what is the historical effect that is still playing to it right now? What are the effects of it right now? So my advice to entrepreneurs or companies that are looking into whether to move here or not, I would say just ask yourself why. Also ask yourself how is this network different than others? How is this network stronger than others? Are they and lastly, is this a welcoming network? And so from what I have seen, we're all ready to provide resources and connections to those who are newcomers, because we just want more people to come through. And so, yeah, I don't know if that answered your question through women in mobility, but you can see that I love it so much.
I mean, it definitely answered the question that our region is just awesome. So why would you want to be?
It truly is. It truly is. And just, 3 years ago, my then boyfriend, now husband, was telling me that, where he got a job at Ford, come to Detroit. And I was like, I won't go to a place unless I feel like I can dream in it. And so I was like, I'm going to give it a chance. I came to Detroit. I spent 1 week just networking and trying to understand, what is it that is here that I can't find elsewhere? And I was interviewing in places like California and New York and Chicago, but there's just so much lack of hubris here. And there's just, humility in the way we do things. And I don't know if it's because of the history of the place or because of the diversity of the place, all the generations of immigrants that came here. I don't know what it is, but it's just great here.
I think that's kind of a perfect segue into our fourth theme of diversity and inclusion, and that this region is a welcoming area, and that's what's also helping with kind of building of partnerships. There's no shortage of projects or an inventory of projects here. We've got APMA's Project Arrow, the all-Canadian designed mission vehicle, which is going to be fully built using Canadian manufacturers and technology and innovation being designed here. So I'm wondering, we've got this welcoming community, we've got an inventory of projects. How do we ensure that these projects going forward and that they're welcoming for Carolyn? I'm wondering if you can touch on.
I think that's a really good question, and I would go back to some of what Peter was saying earlier, and I feel like the way that we can make sure it's more inclusive is really starting with our educational system and building it up from there. I think the fact that our universities are willing to partner, we have companies like the Detroit Mobility Lab bringing on the Michigan Mobility Institute and things like that. The fact that we're working binationally, the fact that we can recommend different universities for areas of different expertise, bringing people together in those different ways and starting with education and then moving in those students into the workforce is how we can make sure that we're staying inclusive.
It's so it's so important for business and organizations to work very hard on their diversity within their organizations. We always found it so incredibly beneficial to have people from different kind of cultural backgrounds, different experiences, different genders. It led us to an outcome that I think was much better than having only a very narrow perspective at looking at a problem. And the reason why is because we're all problem solvers. right? Diane knows when they're hiring, they look for people with very good problem-solving skills. And the ability to apply the technical is a tremendous benefit. At the root of it, they need to be very good problem solvers. And one of the ways of approaching that within a team is to make sure that you've got people who are going to look at it from different angles and through different lenses so that you get to the best possible outcome. So we want to see that diversity of all of this, all of the cultural and the gender and the educational background, to put people, someone with a PhD as someone who's a technician or a technologist, and someone who's got 30 years experience with their hands on the tools. To see what you can come up with is quite remarkable. But the thing is, as I started off saying, we have to work really hard at it. It's really tough. It is. When you decide that you're going to focus on your diversity and inclusion, and you're going to measure yourself on the proportion of women within your workforce. And yet, when you advertise for a skilled trades electrician and you get 20 applicants, 2 of them will be female. So there's something fundamentally wrong in that pipeline, right? That pipeline that you guys are generating, Peter, attract women into the trades and then get them through to graduation and get them into the workplaces. So we've got to work really hard at encouraging young women to consider trades and science and technology as a career option. And that's what groups like Build a Dream. Sorry, I blanked out on the name there. I saw the color purple. That's what I'm seeing in my mind, because that's their brand. They do such an amazing job at their branding. Way to go, Noor. But Build a Dream looks at that and really promotes that. And we have on this panel, you've managed to staff or to equip your panel with a majority of women. That's really hard to do when you're talking about technology and automation and the automotive industry. It's the opposite is typically true, but clearly you guys worked very hard to make sure you have diversity and a diversity of opinions and backgrounds in this panel. I think it makes it better. And I think we just have to work really hard across a whole spectrum to make sure that we achieve that diversity and that ultimate real benefit and boost to our companies.
Yeah,
Shelley, sorry, if I can comment. Shelley called me out, so I have to respond to her.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
And I agree. There aren't enough females in our engineering and skilled trades programs, and we need to do a better job of getting more females not only in the programs but also graduating and getting them ready for the workforce. But as Shelley mentioned, we have to work at that. Like, just as industry has to work at that, we have to as well. And it is really hard. And I don't have the answers. I don't know what the silver bullet is, but I know that we are working at that. We are trying to get more women into these skilled trades, into the engineering trades or engineering programs, science and technology. And one of the initiatives we've started here at the college is Women in STEM. And so we formed a club to try to generate some enthusiasm about STEM in women. And we've had a great response. We just started the initiative and we've had a fantastic response. So I'm hoping maybe that's part of the solution and we can go forward. But getting back to the international diversity, I mean, this region is a very, very diverse region. And the college is extremely diverse from the perspective that we have, getting close to half of our students are international, many of them from overseas. Which is fantastic. So it brings that different perspective, a different look, and we have the ability to think differently because of those people coming in here and enjoying our college and learning these skills and mingling with our domestic students. But one of the things that we also have to consider is that we have an international border right here. And that's really unique as well. And a lot of times I forget that, because this is one region and now it's just Detroit, it's right there, right? But the neat thing about that is, the researchers a lot of times will look at, trying to partner up with somebody from an international institution to do some research or to collaborate. And we have that opportunity right here, and it's really easy to do. So I think that's a unique thing about where we're located, is that we have an international, border that we can collaborate very, very quickly. And in fact, I went to school at Wayne State, and for me to get from my house to Wayne State took me 20 minutes, and here I am going to school in a different country. So, and I know in other regions you have to travel for an hour to get to school, and you're in your own city. So I think that's very unique.
And I think, to be honest, we could do a better job at our communication of some of these initiatives if we want to increase our diversity. If you think about the difference of recruiting for job applicants, say putting it in the newspaper the old school way versus Indeed, you're going to approach a whole different subset of people. And I think it's the same idea with some of these electric vehicle initiatives. I was speaking with a friend the other day, and she told me about a recent immigrant who is so proud of his auto repair shop. He's from Iran. And I just kept thinking, does he know anything about Project Arrow? Would he be someone, downstream? He's so enthusiastic. He's so happy to be here. He's a passionate entrepreneur. How could we get his opinion and his participation in a project like that to really expand it? And I think those are the types of things that could really help us with our diversification of this wonderful, technology and opportunity that we have.
It's a great piece of feedback too for us to include back on Project Arrow for sure. So I know we're running close to our time, so I wanted to pose one last question to the group, and we can kind of go round table style. But I'm wondering what is that one piece of advice you would give either a startup, an SME, a large firm that's considering an international partnership, or just even a partnership in general? Like, what is that one piece of advice that all partnerships really need to start with? Carolyn, let's go with you.
Sure. So I think for starters, I think that there have been a lot of organizations in Canada and in Detroit that have already reached out to each other and made those partnership connections. There's, with WindsorEssex, with Detroit Mobility Lab, with Mish Auto, and just having those relationships and those, that vast network is a great point. So I would encourage anyone that's a supplier or a startup to reach out to someone that's made those connections already and just start that networking process. I know from the Mish Auto standpoint, we've had a lot of really good success with our mobility meetups that we do with Planet M. And even though we haven't been able to do face-to-face since March, we've still been able to hold those events virtually and still make time for people to connect offline or in smaller groups or individually. But I think a lot of it is just, reaching out to people that are interesting, that are like-minded, and use those social networks, use these types of meetup events, and just put yourself out there and really talk to people.
Excellent. Peter, we'll go to you next.
Well, I'm going to reiterate what I said earlier about getting to know the educational institutions and seeing their strengths and how do you leverage that. For example, with respect to the college, we can apply for grants, and we can work with companies and leverage some of the money that companies are investing and get some money from government agencies. And there are some opportunities in the U.S. as well to do that. So I think having that network, that ecosystem, and knowing who to go to get that expertise and build your company and build your knowledge, I think is really important.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Hind.
I don't know what else to say. I think Caroline and Peter both touched on the ecosystem, and I think that's like really, really important. I would say just examining the strength of the ecosystem that you're trying to get into, examining the richness of resources that are within that ecosystem, and like understand the opportunities that you can find just through integrating it, and definitely reach out. And one person is going to lead you to another, and definitely reach out to government as well. Not necessarily like to sell your product, but also just to understand like what are similar partnerships that we have done before that could be similar to what you could experience with us.
Excellent. Shelley?
Well, So those people who know me know that if it can be said in 1 or 2 words, it'll take me 10 or 20 to say it. So you ask for one piece of advice. I'm not going to give one piece of advice. I've got a few pieces of advice. But one really important one is ask questions. So, Diane, you mentioned about the importance of networking, and you've deliberately become involved with different organizations. And when you strike up conversations with people, ask them questions. The answers you get sometimes will lead you in a direction and down a path that you hadn't contemplated before. And so by asking lots of questions and continuing to ask questions, you will get some responses and connections that will be very, very positive. But know why it is that you're asking those questions. So always go into it. If your intention is to expand your business into Michigan and to expand focused on the technology sector or the fintech sector or the automotive industry, make sure you know that, so that you can be very intentional about the questions that you're asking, of the connections you're making. And so make connections. So ask questions, know the direction you want to go in, and make connections, and make them a meaningful connection. So in other words, you actually have something to give as a business, right? You're not just taking, you are giving, and you're giving, hopefully ultimately by employment, through economic activity. You're paying taxes, you're supporting the economy, and you're supporting the workforce and the educational institutions. So you've got something to give, and make those connections, knowing that just like any kind of communication, it's two-way. These are two-way connections. So that was 3. So I think that's pretty good. I didn't give you 20, but I gave you 3 pieces of advice.
That was fantastic. Thank you, Shelley. And I'll give the last word to Diane. What is that one piece of advice?
Wow. Well, I think that everybody else has covered most of the points I was thinking about. I was similar to Shelley, struggling to put it all into one word. But you think about it like any partnership, right? I mean, you got to know what you want. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a partner that might not be the right partner for you. And do your research and make sure that they are going to be able to provide what it is that you're expecting, and make sure that what you have to bring, as Shelley pointed out, is valuable for them as well. And then that's the path to success. And like everything, I say to my daughters who are young in their relationships as well, is, move slowly and cautiously and build trust, and don't jump into the deep end right off the get-go. So here's my advice.
Good advice, especially for those girls.
I love that. That is fantastic. And I believe we are at our time for today's session. So finally, thank you to everyone. Thank you, Hind. Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Diane. And thank you, Shelley, for taking the time today to join us on this speaker sessions. And thank you, APMA, for putting on the conference. We look forward to seeing everybody, hopefully in person next year. But if not, virtually will work as well. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.